Hey guys, this is John. Very sad news in the chess world yesterday as we learned of the passing of Grandmaster Viktor Korchnoi at age 85. And I'm sure if you follow chess news, you've been seeing lots of tributes to Viktor the Terrible today, and I'm sure you will in the coming days and weeks. But I wanted to do my own tribute to this man and this great player who was such a pillar in chess for decades and decades. And it seems appropriate to start with some biographical information about him. I can't possibly summarize everything about this man's career and his life in chess in one short video, but I'll do my best to give you guys the highlights. So Korchnoi was an extremely active player. That's the one thing that stands out in my mind. If you look up his games in the database, he has 5,000 plus tournament games that have been recorded. And if you ask any tournament player about how exhausting even one tournament game is, let alone 5,000, then you can get a perspective on how much chess that is and how much time he spent at the board over the years grinding his way through tournaments of all different categories, all the way up through the World Championship. And he was born in Leningrad in the Soviet Union in 1931. His father died in 1941, I believe in the conflict between Finland and the Soviet Union. And Korchnoi himself was a survivor of the siege of Leningrad, World War II. Went through a lot of hardship to make it through, and as I understand, many of his relatives, especially on his father's side, ended up starving to death in that siege. And he picked up chess seriously shortly thereafter. So when he was about 13, he began studying it seriously, and fortunately World War II was waning at that point. And he became a grandmaster in 1956, and he went on to become a four-time Soviet champion, which, if you follow some of the old cross tables and just know about the rich history of Soviet chess, becoming a four-time Soviet champion is an incredibly big deal. The years that he won it were pretty much the golden age of Soviet chess, if you will. So many tremendous players, and that alone would be enough for any player to stand on for the rest of their career. But that was just the beginning of Korchnoi's career highlights. He's probably best known as the player who maybe deserved to become world champion, or the strongest player never to become world champion. And he had three battles with Anatoly Karpov. The one in 1974 was the first time those two faced off in a proper match. And that was when Fischer refused to defend his title, and Karpov became world champion by default. But prior to that, he had to beat Korchnoi in a very narrow match, and Korchnoi lost 11.5 to 12.5 to Karpov. And even at that stage, he was close to becoming world champion. In 1976, Korchnoi decided to defect. He was playing a tournament in Amsterdam, and he very famously went up to the English Grandmaster Tony Miles and asked Miles how to spell political asylum, so he could actually claim political asylum. And it was a very brave move, his defection. I believe he went to West Germany and then eventually settled in Switzerland. He had to leave his wife and his son behind for several years, and he was not able to communicate with them. The Soviet authorities were using his wife and his son later in his matches with Karpov, it was said, to try and intimidate Korchnoi and mess with his psychological balance. So that was a big decision for his life and his chess career, to defect away from the Soviet Union, and he was basically ostracized by almost all of the Soviet players thereafter. So in 1978, he played another match against Karpov in Baguio, the Philippines, and that was probably Korchnoi's best chance to become world champion. I know the 1974 candidates final was pretty close with Karpov as well, but that match in Baguio stands out because he lost 6-5 with 21 draws, but it was a very tightly contested match. Karpov literally won in the final game. And they played again in 1981. Korchnoi battled once more into the candidates final. And unfortunately there for him, in Milan, Italy, he lost pretty badly. I think it was 6-2. So he didn't have a good run of it there. And you might expect his career to just kind of tail off thereafter. Maybe play some tournaments here and there. But no, Korchnoi kept going for decades and decades after that. And I already mentioned the sheer number of games that he played. But just imagine in 2009, he became Swiss champion. So living in Switzerland, he became, I think, the oldest person ever to win their national championship. And in 2011, at the big open tournament in Gibraltar, he defeated none other than Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana. Caruana was 18 years old at the time and over 2,700. And Korchnoi, who was 61 years older, let that sink in for a second, 61 years older than Caruana, defeated him in that game. And I think that stat alone just speaks to the longevity of his career. In 2007, he was in the top 100. He was ranked number 85 in the world, and he was 75 years old. I don't know of anyone even close to that today. I think someone in one of the threads I saw posting about Korchnoi said that the highest rated top 100 player is, or the oldest top 100 player is 49 at the moment. So he was 75 and he was in the top 100. He played a match just last year, even though his health has been declining for many years. And he was pretty active in chess all the way up to the end. Many people will talk of Korchnoi with such reverence because he left an unmistakable mark on the game. He made a lot of contributions to opening theory. Some openings that stick out for me are the King's Indian from the white side. He didn't really play the King's Indian as black, but he was always a ardent proponent of the white pieces in the King's Indian and was constantly trying to beat that opening. The English opening, he played as white for many, many years. The Sicilian defense for black, and especially the French defense for black. That was one of his go-to weapons. And Korchnoi's style was of the counter-attacking variety, and the French defense was perfectly suited for that. So lots of contributions he made to opening theory over the years. And one final thing, this is something I put out on Twitter today. I was taking a look at Garry Kasparov's books called My Great Predecessors, where he talks about all of the world champions prior to himself. And if you look on the book spines for the My Great Predecessors series, and I believe there's 4 or 5 books, but if you look on the spines of those books, it lists all the guys, Steinitz, Lasker, Capablanca, everyone. And Korchnoi is the only person listed on the spines of those books who is not a world champion. So that just indicates the high regard that Kasparov and the elite, the chess elite, held for Korchnoi. So with that, I wanted to show you a game that Korchnoi played in 1962 against Bobby Fischer. And this was played in the Candidates Tournament in Curacao, the island of Curacao. It's hard to find just one game to look at. If I were to make a proper tribute to Viktor Korchnoi, it would be hours and hours and days of footage because the guy played so many games. But I always liked this game that he played with the black pieces. So let's get into it. So Fischer opened with e4. And Korchnoi decided to play the Pirc opening, which was a slight departure from what he usually played. By his own admission, he didn't play this opening too often. But he had a specific reason for going into this line. Fischer plays the Austrian attack, f4, one of the most aggressive ways you can combat the Pirc. Bishop g7, knight f3, castles. And here Fischer went bishop to e2, which nowadays is considered pretty toothless. You'll see that the modern theory revolves around bishop d3 and also e5 directly, advancing in the center. But at the time this game was played, bishop e2 was considered the go-to move, and this was the basis for Korchnoi's preparation in this game. So he played c5. This is a common counterattacking device. The idea is after d takes c5, as Fischer played, you have this response queen a5. And now black is threatening to not only regain the pawn with queen takes c5, but he also has this idea knight takes e4, whereupon there would be 3 attackers on the knight on c3. Note that simply recapturing d takes c5 would be rather accommodating. White could trade queens and then maybe play e5, trying to cramp black's position. So this queen a5 move is perfectly in the spirit of the position because it's too dangerous for white to, for instance, take on d6 and allow knight takes e4. So after queen a5, Fischer castled. And Korchnoi gets to pick up the pawn. Queen takes c5 check. And now the position resembles a Sicilian dragon. You can see that black has the dragon bishop on g7, and the black c pawn has been traded for the white d pawn. So knight c6. And now this interesting maneuver, knight d2. And Fischer was such a student of chess theory and devoured virtually everything in print in chess at the time and even earlier. So Korchnoi basically had a strong idea of what line Fischer was going to go for. And Korchnoi says in his notes to this game, I was brushing up on his notes prior to making this video from one of Korchnoi's books, and he was talking about how he was in Moscow on a vacation shortly before this tournament in Curacao. He was just preparing and relaxing, and he was going over some preparation with his helper, his second, Grandmaster Vasukov. And Vasukov convinced him to play this line. He said to Korchnoi, Fischer's such a principled player. He knows everything that's been worked out and printed in the game. He's going to play this line. He's going to go for knight d2 because right now it's considered to be the strongest. So I've got this move in mind that you can play against him. And even though Korchnoi was not a big practitioner of the Pirts, he agreed to go for this line. He was convinced by Vasukov's arguments. So here, Korchnoi played the very nice move a5. So a seemingly random pawn thrust. But this a5 move is directed against the knight on d2. Since it's trying to make its way over to the b3 square, attacking the black queen and forcing it to retreat, a5 starts to plant some seeds of doubt in white's mind, because if knight b3 is played, then after the queen retreats, a4 is on the agenda. So let's say something like this occurs, queen b6. White has to reckon with this real possibility of a4. And if the knight is forced away, let's just play some random move for white. If the knight is forced away again, you could imagine that a3 would be especially effective. White definitely does not want the defender of the knight on c3 to leave, because that would bode nicely for black's bishop on g7. Suddenly you would start looking at discovered attacks on the knight here. So after a5, Fischer decided to play a4, stopping the pawn in its tracks. But as happens in the Sicilian, when black plays a5 and white responds with a4, this b4 square becomes weak, and it becomes a prime outpost square for the black knight on c6. It can never be chased away by the white a-pawn, should it land there. So Korchnoi played exactly that. He jumped into b4. And here Fischer erred. And this move is understandable that he played. It looks like the natural continuation of knight d2. But Korchnoi indicates in his notes that knight c4 was the best try, perhaps looking to play bishop e3 with tempo on the queen. But Fischer, ever the principled player, decides to stick to his guns and plays knight b3, continuing the maneuver. Korchnoi brings the queen back. And now g4. So this is a theme in this line for white to thrust the g-pawn down the board, trying to disturb the black knight on f6. You can imagine if white plays g5 and this knight is forced to move, then knight to d5 becomes nice for white, attacking the queen and also the pawn on e7. But g4 is a flat-out mistake, as you can see by my annotation here. And if you would like to pause the video and figure out how Korchnoi responded to Fischer's g4, feel free to do that now. Okay, so Korchnoi's style was often characterized as an awkward one for direct players like Tal and Fischer, more tactically minded, strong calculators like that. And I'm not sure this position is the greatest example of it, but he was kind of, in my opinion, a chameleon, Korchnoi. He was comfortable in a wide range of positions, and he was a great counterattacker. And here he played bishop takes g4, so capturing the pawn that just landed there. And after bishop takes g4, knight takes g4, queen takes g4, Fischer probably underestimated black's play with knight takes c2 at the very end of this variation. And now the rook on a1 is attacked by the knight, and the queen is attacking the knight on b3. And even though black is temporarily down material, his activity will more than compensate for that. And as we'll see, he'll actually emerge ahead in material when the dust settles. So after knight takes c2, Fischer decided to continue moving forward. He played knight b5. Knight d5 was also possible, but Korchnoi gives some lines to indicate how this would not work out after queen takes b3. So knight b5, Korchnoi grabs on a1, Fischer recaptures. And material-wise, if we just count the material, white is doing okay. White has, what, 2 minor pieces against black's rook plus 2 pawns? So slight material edge to black, only 1 point, but perhaps survivable for white. But look at the coordination, or lack thereof, in the white camp. I mean, especially this knight on a1, far removed from the action. Knights do not do well in the corner. And there's just not a lot of harmony going on in these white pieces. Whereas black has a nice compact position. The rooks are not yet participating, but the structure, which is free of weaknesses, and the ability for black to play down the c-file gives black a big edge here. Not to mention other weaknesses. I should probably highlight, for instance, the pawns on e4 and a4, which are undefended. And Korchnoi quickly goes to work trying to capitalize on that. So he plays queen c6, hitting the pawn on e4. Fischer decides to press forward, f5, so having the queen defend the pawn. He could also try queen f3 here, but Korchnoi indicates in his notes that he was planning on playing rook f c8, attacking the bishop on c1. And should the bishop move, bishop takes b2, snaps off another pawn, and black is definitely in control. I think even in the case of knight a7, giving up an exchange but taking another pawn, just compare the pawn count and also take another gander at this knight on a1, completely useless on this square. Easy to see that black is just winning. So, after f5, Korchnoi replies with another nice move, queen to c4, attacking 2 undefended points. You guys know I love to harp on that in my videos, attacking undefended pieces, and good display of that right here. So f1 and a4. Fischer defends the rook, queen f3, but queen takes a4. Now this knight has no stability on a5, or on b5 rather, it's just undefended. So Fischer plays knight c7, attacking the rook in the corner, but queen takes a1. And I don't know if Fischer was intending originally to take the rook on a8. If knight takes a8 were to be played, then after rook takes a8, f takes g6, f takes g6, white does get a potential check down on f7, followed by queen takes e7. But I think even in this case, black has numerous ways to consolidate. I think I saw the computer was liking queen to b1, taking an eye on the e4 pawn. I think Korchnoi also mentioned queen a4. Black is up, 2 pawns here? So they should be well on their road to consolidating and kind of extinguishing white's short-term initiative. Nevertheless, that was probably the best chance for white, continuing with the plan of taking the rook on a8. You can see that white's hand is forced here after queen takes a4. I suppose Fischer could maybe play knight a3, trying to save the knight on b5 and block the attack on a1, but again, no harmony in white's position. Black will proceed to bring the rooks into the game and just dominate with his numerous extra pawns and better coordination. So knight c7, queen takes a1, and now Fischer played knight d5, probably striving to create some confusion in the position, attack the e7 pawn, and introduce f6 as an idea. But Korchnoi played it very cool, rook ae8. So he's using that rook so that the rook on f8 can stay here guarding the f7 square. And in Korchnoi's opinion, white is lost now after rook ae8. He says this was a pretty trivial cleanup job, although I did find his technique to be nice here. So Fischer played bishop to g5, discovered attack on the queen and also hitting the pawn on e7. But queen takes b2, scoop up another pawn. Bishop takes e7. Now black is forced to give an exchange back, but due to the number of pawns that he's won, I'm sure that Korchnoi was completely confident here. And he played this flawlessly. Bishop e5, very nice stabilizing move. It defends the pawn on d6 and also threatens queen takes h2 checkmate, queen and the bishop combining. So Fischer plays rook f2, trying to block the attack on h2. Queen c1 check, rook f1. Now the queen comes all the way back to h6, simply to assist in the defense of the black king. Can't hurt. Yeah, also mate on h2 is threatened again, so h3 defending against that. G takes f5. This looks a bit scary, but given that black can always hide on h8, and the bishop being so stable on e5, there's no real danger to black in playing this. Bishop takes f8. White cashes in on the exchange, and then plays knight e7, followed by knight takes f5. But roundabout here, any initiative that Fischer had has been dispelled, and we see that black is just up 3 pawns. He's got D, B, and A pawns that need to be reckoned with, especially the A pawn, which is already a huge thorn in white's side. So Fischer played rook g1. Korchnoi pushed the pawn. Rook g4. Queen b3. White definitely cannot stand a queen trade. So queen f1. a3. And now rook g3. Kind of a clever move, right? Or maybe not so clever. I don't know. Kind of depends on how you view this move. So black to move. If you were Viktor Korchnoi, how would you choose to finish this game off? So what would you play? You can pause your video if you like. Okay, so I don't think there's too many tricks for white after bishop takes g3. Note that if bishop takes g3, queen a1 check, black can play queen b2, proposing a trade and completely defending, no mate on g7. But maybe Korchnoi had a sense of humor about this because he decided to play queen takes g3 instead. A pretty vicious blow, sacrificing the queen for the rook. But Fischer immediately resigned because if knight takes g3, then a2, and the bishop on e5 is beautifully supporting the a-pawn, which will advance next move and either encourage a trade or black will just be up so much material that it's hopeless for white to continue. So nice finishing touch there by Korchnoi, queen takes g3. So a win in 33 moves with black against Bobby Fischer, who admittedly did not have the greatest tournament in Curacao in 1962, but still, any win against Fischer, especially when you're black, is something to be remembered. And Korchnoi actually defeated him twice in Curacao. So nice little side note right there, too. So once again, I wish I had the ability to do a more extensive commemoration of Viktor Korchnoi. Maybe I will at some point, looking at more of his games on my channel. But the guy just played so much chess and so much high-level chess over the years that it's impossible to quantify. And I would highly encourage you to check out his games. You know, go to, for instance, chessgames.com and just kind of browse through his games over the years. Kasparov's My Great Predecessor book on Korchnoi and Karpov is excellent, too, just for getting biographical information on Viktor Korchnoi. And Kasparov does a very good job of documenting Korchnoi's career in that book. And you can also check out Korchnoi's books themselves. They are called, I think he has more than one book, but his autobiographical works are called Viktor Korchnoi, My Best Games, and he has 2 volumes, one volume of his white games and one volume with his black games. And this game I just showed you against Bobby Fischer is one of the ones he analyzes in this book. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Rest in peace, Viktor Korchnoi. Thank you for giving us such great games over the years. And if you guys want to leave any sort of comments about Korchnoi, what you liked or didn't like necessarily about him, feel free to do so. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this game and this video. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.